I think that this show has upped the diversity factor for the Glass Center because it's very different kind of art than what they generally show. And there is more of a conceptual basis to a lot of the work, and that's how the show hangs together, because the work is very disparate, and so you kind of go, well, that doesn't go with that. But it does, because it's the same interest in expressing those ideas in a fairly new aspect of glassmaking.
Hello, podcast listeners. Before we begin today's episode, I want to thank everyone for their support for Taming Lightning, especially those who are supporting me through Patreon. They help cut the cost of hosting the podcast, and for their contributions receive some additional benefits. Now, during my hiatus, I worked on getting ahead on the podcast production, and so my Patreon supporters get early access to the end of 2022. Additional documents such as Chapter 2 notes, guidelines for vessel structure, and plasma sculpture are downloadable by my Patreon patrons for personal access. Again, this is a special privilege to my Patreon supporters. Those of you who are supporting me through viewing and checking out the website, it's there and available on the blog, so no worries there. If you want to support the podcast, join me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/taminglightning. And I also accept one-time donations through Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/taminglightning. Let's get to it.
Neon lights, I'm baffled. Pick it apart like samples. Give me all I can handle. Light me up like a candle. I'm taming lightning. Curse it, got that lightning. Plasma in my veins.
Welcome back, and welcome to the Taming Lightning podcast. I'm Percy Ackles II, your host for Taming Lightning. I'm an artist, alchemist, and educator at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, where I'm pioneering the development of a studio for the emergence of plasma and neon light art. Self-study in this field has led me to a growing network of experts and institutions that allow for conversations with artists, makers, and experts related to plasma, neon, glass, and beyond. Through this podcast, I hope to expand our understanding of plasma and neon light, explore the potential for electrified gases as an artistic medium, and have fun making and sharing what I learn along the way. Hello, Lightning Tamers. This is episode number 50, and in today's podcast, recorded July 16th, 2021, on the closing night of the exhibition Lit Light and Transmission, I'll be joined by Vicky A Clark to talk about her background as an independent curator, writer, and critic, as well as insights on the exhibition. Like I mentioned in the last episode, I was excited to have a review about the exhibition. Now, this doesn't exclude the interviews to promote the exhibition, which I think are fine, but this gives me insight on what people see and understand when I put the work and effort out into the world. You might find it strange, but coming into this exhibition, I wasn't really into it. I was overwhelmed by the pandemic and my financial positioning, and so when we were installing the show, I did find myself realizing how the message of the show has been transformed by our current circumstance. That is, in all of this darkness, hope is written in light. And so, as work started to be revealed in the installation, I started to enjoy it more and more. And today I look back with a sense of accomplishment, something that I find very hard to do regardless of my endeavors. And Vicky reminds me to take notice. Vicky A Clark, born in 1950, is an American independent curator of contemporary art and art historian and writer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, Clark moved to Santa Monica, California at the age of 10. She attended Santa Monica High School before attending UCLA and majoring in art history. Graduating in 1972, she then attended UC Davis for her master's degree in art history and went on to receive her PhD in art history from the University of Michigan. She has been a part of the Pittsburgh art scene for 30 years as a curator at the Carnegie Museum of Art and the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. She has also curated an exhibition on Pittsburgh art titled The Popular Salon for the People, Associated Artist at the Carnegie Museum of Art, and authored the accompanying catalog. Welcome to the podcast, Vicky. So, Vicky, can you tell us a little about what you do?
Well, luckily enough, now I'm retired, so I get to do whatever I want to do, but I've been a curator of contemporary art for a long time now, working in museums, art centers, and also independently. So I have the best job in the world because I get to talk to artists all the time and work with artists, and they're just phenomenal human beings who have such creativity that it's really exciting. I've also taught at universities, and I'm also a critic / writer. And, when I studied art history, I studied late medieval art, which has nothing to do with contemporary, it seems, and then came to the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, and the Carnegie International got me really excited about contemporary art, so I switched areas, and I've been doing it since the mid-'80s.
What drew you to medieval art?
Well, it's late medieval art, so it's the time period when artists are trying to reproduce the world around them, right? But they didn't have the skills because everything had been so structured before that, and so it's all experimentation, and it's really great to see them grappling with how to do that. And actually, I think that's why I like contemporary, because artists are solving all kinds of problems and dealing with all kinds of issues and experimenting. And I find it interesting to see how their minds work.
So what's kind of interesting is you're labeled as an independent curator, art historian, and writer. So are there curators that are, I guess in this case, maybe I'm answering my own question, there's curators that work for specific museums. Are they independent or not the independent in that case? What makes an independent curator?
An independent curator means you're freelance and you work for yourself. And you get hired by institutions to do the shows. The problem with being an independent curator is that you don't have a museum behind you who has a registrar, a PR person, an installer, an editor, and all that stuff, so you have to do everything yourself.
Oh, man.
And it gets really overwhelming. So.
And you've written for a lot of various publications, such as the Urban Glass Quarterly, which is where I reintroduced myself to you through the review you did of this exhibition.
Right. The connection with Glass Magazine came about in what I think is the usual way. One of my friends in New York was asked to write an article on Michel Blondel, the French artist who makes incredible glass work. And my friend couldn't do it, and I was staying with her, and she said, "Oh, but I know somebody who could do it." So that's how I got started at Glass, and I wrote for them for a while, and then it kind of fell off. And then, is it called Gas? Gas was in Pittsburgh, and I happened to be at a cocktail table, of course, and I ran into Andrew Page, who is now the editor. And I said, "Oh, I used to write for you." And so he's been bringing me in to write a lot about glass from a contemporary curator's point of view, not from a glass point of view.
Okay. Yeah.
So
that definitely helps, because if you're kind of stuck in the glass, you may not get all the little extra connections to help, understand the art in general, because you can get a little too focused when you're looking at the material as the material specialist.
And I think you guys who are in glass tend to do that because you see what people are doing, what they're trying to do. So you see the mistakes, you see the successes. I look at an overall work for the most part, and what interests me is, why did somebody choose glass as the medium to make this kind of work. And especially like some of the works in this show that are conceptually based.
Yeah.
And if you look at my exhibition record, they're almost all conceptually based shows. So I'm interested in the ideas and how they're expressed visually.
That seems to be a really big thing that's been kind of taught through most art school education, is to think on the conceptual aspect, even though undergrads should be really focusing on the ability to produce work with a skillful understanding of the material.
Well, I think that's one of the big debates in art education is, if you don't have the skills, and if you don't have the basic skills of, for instance, drawing a figure and knowing anatomy, then that limits what you can do no matter what medium you use. But on the other hand, art has become so conceptually based that it's pretty rare now for aesthetically based art to be appreciated. It's really switched. That pendulum has really swung toward the ideas. And I think that now that postmodernism is kind of in its dying days, we're moving back to a different kind of art-making practice. But, that's what's so interesting as a contemporary curator. I mean, all of a sudden, around the year 2000, when I went to New York galleries, I noticed that there was so much art using comic and cartoon characters. And I was just like, why? I don't get this. Why? And so 3 other curators and I put together a show of that kind of art and worked out why it was happening. If you look at art now, probably about 3 years ago, all of a sudden, figurative art reappeared. And what you saw in most galleries and a lot of museums were black faces in those paintings. And so it was a real seismic shift in what you could see in a museum. And, you then have Black Lives Matter coming in, and this is making the art world more open and inclusive. But is it really? Because you see those shows, but if you go to the Carnegie Museum of Art, how many people of color do you see on the walls? So, it's got to become part and parcel of the mission, the goals, the beliefs of a place.
Right.
And that is not happening. And it just seems to me, in a real critical sense, that museums are just jumping on the bandwagon. Yes, we support Black Lives Matter. Yes, we support the rights of LGBT. Yes, we support Asian Americans. Yes, but then they don't do anything. They just make the statement.
Yeah.
And that really bothers me.
And that's one of the things that makes, outside, in the art space, the Pittsburgh Glass Center has been always acting in that space consistently, which is really great. I think there's a big pledge to the Glass Art Society for all spaces that provide support and public education, that they are to expand and diversify. They weren't really giving any true guidelines on what that would be.
Right.
And there wasn't any presented consequence for not meeting or even a deadline for how to track that progress.
Well, I think it's really, those kinds of decisions you make are really important. When I was the curator at the Center for the Arts here in Pittsburgh, every show I did I made sure I had regional artists, national artists, and international artists, and they were all treated equally. So that at that point in time, I felt, the regional artists are always looked down on, and I felt they deserved the same kind of respect. So that was really important to me, around 95. I just went to Crystal Bridges in Arkansas, and they live, breathe diversity, and it is in the collection, and it's not like, oh, look at us, we're so cool, we're doing this. It is just there, and they don't beat you up about it. It's just what it should be. It is.
Yeah.
We are a diverse culture, and we should have that. And, you know, to make a comment about this show, I think that this show has upped the diversity factor for the Glass Center because it's very different kind of art than what they generally show. And there is more of a conceptual basis to a lot of the work, and that's how the show hangs together, because the work is very disparate, and so you kind of go, well, that doesn't go with that, but it does, because it's the same interest in expressing those ideas in a fairly new aspect of glassmaking.
So with the show, I was tasked, as the curator of the show, I was tasked with trying to bring in both neon and plasma work. And so my criteria for what I gave myself was, for most people, they don't know the distinction between neon and plasma. It's kind of like a square and a rectangle. So all neon is plasma, but not all plasma is neon. And the best way to show this was to get a whole bunch of different people from different age groups, from different levels of experience, from different ideas and manipulations of the material. And that's part of the diversity here that, you know, you have, for example, you have Michael Fleckner with his, you know, kind of plane and camera and shark objects, where he takes what we normally understand as neon on a two-dimensional plane and brings it to three-dimension.
Right.
And what I had not realized when I also invited Leticia was that she had learned neon from Michael Fleckner. And so she is influenced by bringing her own experience and culture into the three dimensions through her uses of imagery that relate to her background.
Do you know the artist Tavares Strachan?
Yeah.
He has done, they're like glass skeletons, but they're the nervous system.
Yeah.
And so they're very detailed. And I mean, he's one of my favorite artists of all time now. And I think his way of expressing things is so off-center and so provocative in making you think in new ways.
Yes.
And so it's that kind of thing that I really like. It's not that I look at his work, for instance, and say, oh, there's a glass artist, I should look at him. I look at his work because he's doing interesting things. And he chooses glass a lot of the time.
Yeah. I would love to get in contact with him. He's really hard to get in touch with.
Is it?
Yeah. When he had his work here at the
International,
he was supposed to have a talk here. But that got canceled. He didn't have the talk here. So that was the time I was going to try to get in touch with him in person, but that just didn't happen. And then what's really cool about following his work is that I know the person who makes the glass and fills the pieces. So that would be like Wade Martindale. And that's the unique person he was looking for. He was looking for someone who had this specific background with medical glass. So Wade Martindale makes these figures because they're supposed to be anatomical models for students and medical researchers to test the flow of drugs through the medium of blood or a medium substitute. And so that's a family skill that then he employed to then put in gases and light up with plasma.
Yeah, and I mean, that all makes sense, but one of the things I like about him is that he seems to be working with what we do not know. And that's become really interesting to me. How do you know what you don't know? And there's a book, But What If We Were Wrong? And this guy talks about, well, we think gravity is one of the most important forces. Now, you can't see gravity, but you feel the effect of it. What if there's another force out there that we have no idea of? Mm-hmm. And how do you even begin to even investigate that? Yeah. And I love the way Tavares Strachan's mind works. I have gotten in touch with him through his dealer.
Oh.
Because I'm supposed to write something about him, and I'm slightly intimidated.
I hear he's a pretty chill guy, so...
Yeah, he seems like it.
Yeah.
But those are the kinds of things that I find really interesting. And, and then to be able to conceive of something, to think about something, an issue or an idea, and then express it well in your chosen medium is what makes a really good artist. Mm-hmm. And, I've said already that I really like those hearts. And I just think that the use of two kind of competing yet similar forms and the sense of them pumping blood is just really well done. And I'm generally not a big fan of big importance of presentation, but I like them in those shadow boxes.
Yeah.
And to me, they're just absolutely fascinating because there's more of an idea. Mm-hmm. And then the piece right behind you, I can't remember who that is.
That's Ed Kirshner.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think that piece is really smart because to me it plays off of 1950s kind of lava lamps almost, and so it's kind of kitsch on the bottom, and then it's got the pulses and the lightning on the top. And so that, to me, I'm going, how did he do that? And what is this all about? So it pulled me in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's really nice about the pieces you picked here, is that there is such a wide range of different things. And I must admit that I'm one of those people who does not understand the difference between neon and plasma.
Yeah.
So that was a little difficult for me, but in the end it doesn't matter to me.
You get to see the difference.
I'm not the technical person.
It's less about knowing deep down deeply what the difference is being able to see the difference. It's kind of like where people initially look at neon and think beer sign rather than neon sign. And that's the transformation that I'm looking to. If someone wants to dig deeper, that I'm excited for that. But as long as they can kind of see and experience the difference, then they can have a new vocabulary. Because I had I guess I can call him a regional artist here, come from Cleveland, Ohio. It's his name is Jeffrey Chipless. He does recycled neon, and so for him, he doesn't bend the neon. He takes these old signs and reconfigures them bit by bit, and then has someone else fabricate parts to assemble. And he told me about this show that he had in a cemetery, and he had parts of word floating up, and they're not really supposed to say anything, but you're supposed to kind of pick up on, like, okay, if it says see where gone or something like that. And the thing that came up was that people couldn't. His gallery guy was like, "Oh, I'm tired of having to explain your work to people." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "What does he have to explain?" He says, "Well, most people they look at it and says, why do you have beer signs? I was looking for art. Where's the beer? Like, why?" Yeah. But it wasn't even like there wasn't even a semblance of a logo, wasn't a semblance of anything else. But because it was neon, and neon was predominantly advertising, and then shifted to being beer signs or you see them in bars, that was the association people had, and they couldn't see what they were looking at.
Let me ask you a question, because this I think is very interesting. The whole debate between what's art and what's craft. Okay, and in many ways we've really moved beyond that. Mm-hmm. I find among the craft things. The one material that's just booming right now is textiles. And textile artists have gotten conceptual, political. They are making astonishing work. And I mean work that really could stand beside, an Anselm Kiefer or something like that. They're making really important work. My sense of glass is that it's not doing that as much, that it's still kind of stuck in the technical aspect. What do you think?
Glass itself has this strong attachment to craft.
Right.
And some of it
but
may
so
be
does textile.
But the craft doesn't mean, or the technical aspect doesn't mean it couldn't be art, right?
Right.
So, what I do see, and I hear this a lot, is the need to move beyond the glassiness of the glass. Because glass is nice and clear, it's vibrant, it can capture light, it can transmit light, it can transform light, it can hold objects, it can be big, it can be small. And there's so many ways you can accomplish that, and there's so many ways you can aesthetically improve that. The need, I think what will help is where I had, come into glass. Because glass on its own, to manipulate that, whether it's in a hot shop where you're manipulating hot glass, or you're casting, or you're cutting, grinding, or polishing, is sort of this need to compensate in the beginning by exploring other materials, or the need to incorporate materials because that material helps the point of your piece, or the aesthetic, or the focus of the ideas behind the piece. I can see glass there, and I can see glass already quite diversified. It's just that maybe we're focusing a lot on the technical skill because that's easier to perceive as skillful, technical, than is to perceive an idea as being skillful or technical.
Well, I think, one of my entry points, or points of entry into glass, was Kathleen Mulcahy, who I got to know very soon after I came to Pittsburgh. And she was doing her spinners. And I think those are really great examples of a real technical accomplishment. They are big. The colors just are incredible. They're beautiful objects, yet they relate to the body. And so there, from the very beginning, my interest was piqued by the combination of those two things.
Yeah.
And I know I'm biased, and I'm very open about my own biases, and I do appreciate technique. I mean, my God, how can you say a Dale Chihuly is not good, right? But a Dale Chihuly doesn't do it for me as much as somebody who's exploring real ideas.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, and that's an honest way to, and that's a legitimate and acceptable way to look at it. I mean, for me, I can be impressed by a couple pieces, but I'm more impressed what people do not seem to be impressed by. His ability to be able to understand the material, understand the people to make what he wants to have happen. So he's really good at, whether or not you want to separate him from being an artist to be like maybe a project director or manager. It's an art to understand the medium enough and be able to work with people so long that they can just kind of show you something. Hey, we came up with this. Would you want to see this on this form? Yes, yeah, can we do that with this color? So there's a strong design, which should not truly be separated from artists. We can, I come from a generation that plays video games where you can choose a level of a distinct specialty, but then within that specialty, you have all these other things that you can have as attributes. So for me, I like to look a bit deeper at different aspects that maybe I could attribute to what I could do with my own work. And for me, like working through this medium, that at the moment, I mean, with the clouds I have, it's collaborative. This is a work that came from just, hey, can we try putting some of your handmade ladders into a cloud? Can we have it intersecting? It's like, okay, by the time I was comfortable with, doing more of the plasma-related stuff, getting the form, getting the seals right, filling it up and finding ways to mount or hang it, we had come across doing this, and this is probably the same piece filled multiple times to compensate for a lack of knowledge. So when you come back to your thing, how do you know when you don't know? You have to make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think the collaboration is really interesting as well, and it can be really problematic. I mean, if you see videos of Jeff Koons in his studio, this guy does the cars, this guy does hands, this guy does this guy does that, but they know exactly what Jeff wants, and so it all works together. Does that make it less of a work of art because Jeff's not doing it himself? There's that. There are all these assumptions we have that the artist must touch it and do it, and then you work in things like this. I mean, back to Kathleen. Kathleen couldn't have done her work without Ron because she can't hold that form and blow it at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I think that also, in like in this collaboration that you did, it shifts your work and your ideas because somebody else is asking questions and doing something differently.
Yeah. It gets tricky. Collaboration gets trickier the more the skill is out of the hands of the artist. And that's kind of one of the things that happens. Not so much with neon, because you can really get a nice translation from line to physical object. When it comes to plasma, it's pretty unpredictable. You're mixing a lot of different ingredients together, and your form and the size of it can definitely affect its behavior, how it lights up, and even just all types of different things. And so you in a collaboration, it's different but not different. You still trust the person who's going to fill up the light like you would trust someone to do a specific paint job for you. You would trust they would do their best job within the expectations or the idea of what you want to happen in the end. I think it's probably a little bit about letting go of a little bit of control and trusting that the other person will do justice.
Well, it's like any installation when you're a curator and you ask somebody to do a piece for the show, and you don't know whether it's going to be any good or not.
Yeah.
You trust the artist to come up with something really nice, but, it doesn't always work.
Yeah. And I think I want to come back to the where you had made a statement about the choices here. What's interesting, and I'll let you in on this, I didn't choose the work.
I thought your statement was very honest by saying these were people you knew or knew of, which in most exhibitions is an absolute no-no. No. We don't know anybody. We don't, But I just thought, how refreshing. Here's somebody who's looking at it and is honest enough to say, that's how I picked the work.
Yeah.
Or the artists. Yeah.
It's interesting. I never considered that you would ever choose work that it may seem like you may be, biased or picking out, where you could have chose a better person, but, to be honest, you can only choose people that you trust and know.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't have to be like your, best buds, but you have to know the work to some degree.
Yeah.
Here, I thought it was the best way to handle it because we're handling the pandemic, where at the time we didn't know if we were going to get work that people didn't have on hand. So I trust my artists to say, hey, like this is the idea behind the show. I chose you for this reason specifically. Give me what you got, and they give me the best they got. And there's a few like little surprises. Like I was surprised to see Leo Tarkovsky's plasma aero piece. That's his first and only plasma related piece. He's done a lot of work with the neon and graffiti work, and I was really excited to see that there's that influence from that conversation I had just in that conference room we were sitting in before you came in the conversation, where we talked about that, and I encouraged him to do it because he has the years of experience to make these forms with the right structure and confidence that adding an electrode and getting it filled at the facility that also is basically in his backyard,
Right.
That I knew that it could be done. And I was really surprised to see that had actually happened. So like the show was like almost like Christmas to me. You're like opening up stuff. Usually you know what you're getting for Christmas, but nowadays when you get older, you just you're surprised by the gifts that people provide, right? And there's some other surprises too about the show. This is a lot of glass. Glass is known to be fragile and brittle. It's also a lot of glass with gases in them. So the idea of repairing a piece is very low, right? Luckily, only one piece had gotten damaged. And I don't think Leticia would mind me saying this, but it was this piece here. One of the shoulder portions had a break in it. It just happened to be no damage to the outside of the package. It just happened to be a point where it jumbled on the inside enough that it broke. Fortunate for us, I have a contact for Neon here, and he was very confident that he can repair it. And there's a few things that make that doable. If this piece was an argon piece, it would have a little bit of neon, a little bit of mercury in it, and that's a no-no on the repair. Yeah. Luckily, she has kind of really stuck to using just neon and the color tubing to get this nice vibrancy. So that was easy enough. But that wasn't that's the easy part, knowing that it could be repaired. Yeah. It's having to take all the little strings off, take a picture of it, take all those strings off where we had all the connection points at. He had to heat it up, melt the glass together, and then refill it, which means heating it up. And then after that, hopefully having everything labeled correctly, put everything back in place, same length and all that stuff. It is amazing.
One of the worst experiences I ever had was at a show where this woman made a scaled-down model of the Taj Mahal out of industrial pink saran wrap. And it came up in many pieces. And she marked the way you put it together on pink saran wrap with pink nail polish. And we just sat there and said, what do we do now?
Oh, no.
It was awful.
Oh, man, that is too much.
Yeah. So do you see yourself doing more shows?
As a curator?
Yeah.
It's funny. This is the second show I've ever curated. First one was just as I got here to Pittsburgh. I had talked with some friends. I said, hey, let's do we've been a couple years out of school. Let's see where everyone's at to show both ISU, where I came from, Illinois State University, where I came from, and the program and the staff that, people can find their ways in the art if they graduate. It's not easy. It's not easy to do that in any position that you graduate from. And we made it happen. And then we did that back home in Bloomington, found a local gallery through my connections there, and we made it happen. And that was really good. It was smaller than this. We had a really small space, and we had maybe just as many pieces. Really great show. This show is really great. I really love it. I was really nervous about it, mainly because we had both works of various brightnesses and how to balance that out. And if it wasn't a pandemic, I would have brought in a friend who had more experience with this. But we talked through it for months, and then she's like, "Yeah, just you're gonna figure it out. If you have more wall pieces, then it's easy to figure it out." Which is why this is so quick to set up. And you just move
everything all over the room until you find the place.
Exactly.
That's what I always do.
But to answer your question, I have some secret projects of mine. Won't mention it right now. Where it's doing more of this light stuff. I like to see more light work and see all types of people working. People that maybe have never worked in glass, working with it, and that's the main idea. So maybe some tech stuff. I love tech, so I want to see what happens there.
I love text pieces too. I love text. I just got a piece that's a print, and it's absolutely jet black, and then it has Ruth Bader Ginsburg's one of her white collars, and that's it. And it's beautiful. Oh, and there's Justice, Seek Justice, something like that on it. I can't remember that. But I going back to glass and things, I think it's just very interesting how some people are just hardcore technique people. And, I think you do find that in textile, but not as much anymore. I mean, that world, as I say, has totally exploded. I think the lines are more deeply ingrained in the glass world.
Yeah.
And yet there are these people doing these incredible pieces all over the world. And, I'm lucky enough that either I know of some of those artists or the editor at Glass Quarterly knows of them. And so he almost always gives me those people to write about. And because I like making a lot of connections, and my connections are always outside of the glass world. They're video, there are other things like that. But I think that's very important too, because I think that if you stick to technique in a very hard-edged way, you lose the ability to have glass integrated with other mediums. And I think that that's just really a cool thing to do, is to mix up the mediums so that there's a conversation also about materials, which is another layer of the show.
Yep.
And I think there's some really cool things. One of the things at Crystal Bridges was some really beautiful historic glass, just a picture or something, and it had a very intricate pattern etched on it. And in the vitrine right by it was Native American pottery that had a very similar pattern. And I think those kinds of comparisons say so much, about the two different art forms, the two different cultures, the two different time periods, and, kind of connect us as human beings.
Yeah. Any closing remarks about the show?
Well, I'm just really glad that it was here. It is really, I would almost call it a potpourri, because there are a lot of very different works in it. But I think that in a way it becomes kind of an introduction to. And I think those shows are really important because, look, we can do text, we can do a tree, we can do this, incredibly big minimal piece, we can do different materials. And then the next step comes with, okay, let's go into this. And whether it's a specific technique or whether it's a theme show, then you take it to a different level. But this really gives you that variety. And you can't, in a show like this, you can't kind of just walk by or settle into it, because you're looking at the camera and then all of a sudden there's a dirty word on the wall over there, and then, all of a sudden there's lightning going off, and you can't settle. And I think that's really good because it keeps you thinking throughout the whole thing. I'm very impressed. I think you did a great job.
Any tips that you would have as a curator of experience going forward?
Try the most outrageous things you can do. See how many things you can hide in works. I think that one of the things that's the hardest to come to terms with is layout. And as you said, you felt, what am I going to do with this? And that is something, I think you've done a good job, and I think that just gets better and better. The show I just did, which is abstract art from the 1940s in Pittsburgh, that's not what I do. And one of my best friends walked through it with me yesterday and said, that's a Vicky hang. Because I do hang things specifically. And, one thing that I do, the one tip I might give is tape measure is your best friend.
Yeah.
Because I always have a tape measure, and it's always in increments of 3 inches. And it has to be 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. And that's how I lay out things, because here's something that came in from medieval art. Those Gothic cathedrals are built on proportion. And they are built on a proportion that is calculated to impress you and to move your eye upward and have light coming in, because that gives you the sense of God, that abstracted sense of God, not the picture of God, but the idea of God. And that works for a reason, because that proportion is just perfect. And you can tell if you go into a church where the proportion is not right. You can tell, or at least I definitely can tell, if the measurements are off between pieces. And it's more a subconscious thing, but people can tell that. And so I think that measuring and layout is really incredibly important.
All right, thank you.
That's my big tip for the day.
Yeah. One tip at a time, right?
And then my last tip for you is to do more shows.
Do more shows.
Do more shows, make more art, do more podcasts. Just give your life over to this, because you're good.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Taming Lightning podcast. Music credits to the following artists in order of appearance: Retro by One, Next Time by Haiku, the opening theme, Taming Lightning, by Trav B. Ryan, Good to Go by One, and Walking by Roz Hobb. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you, Vicky, for your time on the podcast, your review, and your advice. I'd like to thank the Pittsburgh Glass Center for supporting me as a place of research and inspiration, in addition to their support via the Advancing Black Arts in Pittsburgh grant that funded the exhibition Lit, Light, and Transmission. The Plasma Art Alliance and the Facebook group Neon and Plasma Art for Beginners, where I have an access to a well of knowledge and connects me to some amazing and supportive people. If you'd like to support Taming Lightning, subscribe to the newsletter on www.taminglightning.net or follow on Instagram at Taming Lightning. Other options for support are one-time donation through Ko-fi, spelled ko-fi.com/Taming Lightning. Or you can join me on Patreon for additional perks and benefits. I'll have links provided in the show notes, so feel free to share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, be safe, be healthy, and be strong, and I'll see you next time.